Before we get started, I have a quick favor. I've been self-funding the Finding Genius podcast for 5 years now. I've done over 3,000 episodes. And as you can see on YouTube, we're up over 1 million views on the channel, which is fantastic. The next thing I really want to push on is to get up to 10,000 subscribers. Because once we do, we'll be able to put a donate button and we'll be able to solicit donations to help keep the podcast running and to also get the Finding Genius Foundation moving along. We have a big project studying anxiety, depression, and PTSD and working on a product to help people overcome these problems because I've seen them explode recently after the last 2 years of the whole virus situation. So if you would, please subscribe to the podcast. That would help us tremendously. Give us a thumbs up and check in the description for Buy Me a Coffee. It's about $5. If you could buy me a coffee, I'd really appreciate it. It would help keep the channel going, and I love coffee. Thank you.
Forget frequently asked questions.
Common sense, common knowledge, or Google.
How about advice from a real genius? 95% of people in any profession are good enough to be qualified and licensed. 5%
Go above and beyond.
they become very good at what they do, but only
0.1%.
are real geniuses. Richard Jacobs has made it his life's mission to find them for you. He hunts down and interviews geniuses in every field: sleep science, cancer, stem cells, ketogenic diets, and more. Here come the geniuses. This is the Finding Genius Podcast
With Richard Jacobs.
Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Finding Genius podcast. My guest today is Mitch Francis. He has a book called Badass Solutions for Today's Big Ass Problems, which is an understatement. Mitch is an entrepreneur. He's been working on big issues like revamping public education, the push to make public schools better than private. So he's got a lot of, again, very aggressive, very big proposals to overhaul a lot of the systems we live with in the U.S. And, a lot of them are broken. I don't think anyone would really disagree. So let's get into his solutions. So welcome, Mitch. Thanks for coming.
Thanks, Rich. It's great to be with you.
Yeah. Well, tell me a bit about your background and what compelled you to write this book.
Those are two separate questions. They're going to take me a while.
Background first, and then we'll get into the other part.
So I grew up in Denver, and as you might guess, I was a skier. I was actually a professional skier. I went to University of Colorado and majored in real estate. Interestingly, University of Colorado was one of the only universities at that time that offered a real estate major. So
I've never heard of that.
yeah, it was great. That's what I wanted to do, from the very beginning. And they had a program. It was great. And then I was able to teach skiing on weekends and holidays while I was at the University of Colorado. And you can probably picture me studying on the chairlift. So
I don't, I don't want to turn the call into like a whole real estate thing, but just maybe a sentence or two. Like, what did you learn that, let's say a realtor wouldn't learn or a title company wouldn't learn, or is it you learned everything because you had a lot more time and attention to it?
Well, you do. You learn all the basic real estate things that, that are in most real estate courses for brokers and agents and things like that. But in addition, a major takes into account a lot of other business features like business law, marketing, accounting. You get a pretty good general business background and then certainly be able to apply that toward real estate.
And there's one more quick question about it. Did you ever do anything in real estate, or, once you went through it, you're like,
Done real estate all my life. Actually, I've built commercial buildings, office buildings, shopping centers, some condominium projects. I still own and manage commercial real estate all around the country.
Okay, that's cool. Yeah, it's just interesting to me. I've always been fascinated by it, and I've been in it on and off for a long time, and I keep learning more and more and more, usually by making a big mistake. And then I'm like, all right, I won't do that again. So yeah, it's just very interesting. And we'll have to have you back, I guess, maybe to talk about that at some point. But
Happy to.
yeah, but going forward, okay, so this is part of your background. And then how did your background intersect with this book?
We actually had a family tragedy a couple years ago. You may recall that there was a 4th of July parade outside of Chicago in a suburb, and a crazed young man with assault rifles killed 7 people who were attending that parade. And one of the people that he killed was my brother-in-law's brother. And this was just a great guy. And, as you can imagine, the family was just devastated. And beside being, upset by it and hurt for them, I left pissed. And Rich, it caused me to kind of take stock of myself. And I've always been kind of a news hound and interested in current events. And it's just kind of my nature to go, well, why don't they just do this, to solve a problem? And I realized that, so many of the problems that we have today, I've always thought of, at least the beginnings of some really good solution. I wrote an outline. I had no intention of writing a book. So I just wrote an outline, and it turned out that there were 20 of our really major problems, everything from the rising ocean levels to immigration to mass killing to the deficit, all of these problems. And as I said, I had at least the beginnings of really good solutions. And I decided to write the book, and that was just a bit over 2 years ago. And here we are.
How did you know that you had a good solution to any particular thing? Like, did you bounce it off of people? Did you talk to people about it? Like, what was that like?
I did mention it to people, and they would always go, wow, that's, I never thought it could go that direction. So I did get input from people on a lot of these things. But interestingly, so many of them are just basic logic. And here's, with this set of facts, this solution makes sense. And, it's pretty obvious. And, I'd love to get into a couple of them with you, and I think you'll see that, it's not actually very subjective. It's kind of objective of, yeah, that would work.
Yeah, pick one that you'd like to start with. Let's do it.
One of the big things that's bothered me, on a global level is the rising oceans from the, global warming is causing the polar ice caps to melt at a rate that would fill actually 20 Olympic-sized swimming pools, Rich, every second. We are headed, it's hard to imagine, but 20 Olympic-sized swimming pools every second is being melted and going into the ocean. 2024 is going down on record as the hottest year on Earth in recorded history. So it's continuing. And we're headed toward really a socioeconomic global catastrophe. In my view, it's going to be unlike anything that humans have ever faced. By the end of this century, all cities and coastal cities and islands are going to be flooded. And incredibly, Rich, nobody's doing anything about this. But we can. I actually discovered a way that we can stop the ocean levels from rising and at the same time use all that fresh water for the billions of people who live in the most parched areas of our world. And it's very doable.
What would it look like?
Well, kind of interesting. When I address solving a problem, I dig in with what are the facts here? What are the issues about this? Like how much water is going into the oceans? And I found, this amount and equated it to the 20 Olympic-sized swimming pools. But then I took it farther, and I was actually really surprised to discover that all that water, which is even hard to believe, that all that water from melting ice that's going into our oceans is actually just a small fraction of the water that's going into the oceans from just our 20 largest rivers. So, the rivers get rainwater, snow, all snow melt and, along their path distribute water, for aggregate, for plants, for people, for animals, whatever. And whatever's left over, goes into the ocean. And it's massively more than what's being melted by the polar ice caps. And I found that if we channel just 7% of the water from those rivers and move it to arid lands, we can actually stop the ocean levels from rising and at the same time stop hunger and thirst. It's amazing. This solution can really save the planet and its poorest people.
Well, you'd have to transport water sometimes over large distances. So I guess you would need the infrastructure to do that,
We absolutely do it. It's a big deal. But what's amazing was we have a model. For decades, the Central Arizona Project moves water from the Colorado River over 336 miles to provide fresh water to the 5 million people who live in Phoenix and Tucson. It's been done. And we can do this on a global level. And it's actually economically feasible. We're talking about a lot of money, a lot of effort to do this. But when you can provide fresh water for agriculture and for people, it just changes the game to be incredibly valuable.
Yeah, I should have mentioned this in the beginning, but I bet you, I'm going to make a guess, and this is just kind of to be funny, but if you're married, I bet your wife says, Mitch, I don't want you to solve my problem. I just want you to listen to me. And it probably frustrates the heck out of you because you probably constantly are solving problems. And it's like, I love you, but please don't solve any more problems today.
Do you live in my house? I mean, how could you hear this?
I'm similar, and my wife tells me that stuff. Like sometimes she says to me, "I'm not a podcast. Stop asking me questions." And I'm like, "Yeah, I have to ask you questions." So that's why it comes to me.
No, you hit the nail on the head. It's really kind of spooky.
That's funny. So getting back to this, so that's an example of one big problem. Yeah, let's go over like two more, and then I want to ask you kind of a summary of what you see as underlies all the problems, because there's probably commonalities that you've identified. But before we get there, what's another problem that you've thought of a good solution to?
Well, one of the things that's just smacking all Americans in the face is the debt, the U.S. debt. We're currently at $35 trillion, and it's growing at another $1 trillion every 100 days. So the U.S. is just literally drowning in debt and interest payments. Just the interest payments, Rich, are bigger than the entire defense budget of the United States.
And the defense budget is like, what, 850 billion or so?
Yeah, roughly. Yeah. And this is like 900 billion currently. And it keeps going up every day almost. As the more we go into deficit, the more interest we're paying on it. And, here we are once again with this massive problem that literally nobody's doing anything about it. In any real terms. The politicians are running around, with their hair on fire, and they promise you, at the same time, they're going to give you a tax cut, and then they also say, well, but we're going to raise the taxes on some people. And, we're going to cut out, some of the expenses of the federal government. When you put this into, to reality of how big this is, it becomes clear that none of those, Band-Aids are going to do anything, where the current deficit of 35 trillion is actually 7 times the total amount of taxes that are brought in a year by the federal government.
Well, I've seen studies where they say no matter the tax rate, the marginal rates, the U.S. government will collect about 17%, no matter what they do, historically over the past, close to 100 years. I don't know what data you've seen, but that's what I've seen. So it doesn't seem like it's ever going to be more, no matter if you tax people 100%.
You're right. And basically, if we used 100% of the taxes and the federal government spent nothing, not a penny, it would take 7 years to pay off the debt. It's just unrealistic. It's not going to happen, without some really good separate program. That's what I've been working on. And it's pretty interesting. I'd like to throw a question to you that you don't have to answer. It's not a test, but to you and your audience. It's, we hear virtually every day and that the U.S. is bankrupt. And, typically that's the case, when you owe more than you have. And if the U.S. is bankrupt, how is it possible that we have by far the strongest economy in the world? I mean, we're 30% bigger economy than China. And incredibly, we're 15 and a half times bigger than Russia. So
I think Mark Twain said this, he supposedly went bankrupt. And they said, how did that happen? He said, slowly and then suddenly. I've had, big time financial problems before myself. You have money until all of a sudden you don't, and then all of a sudden you start having to default on things, and that's what really avalanches the problem. So I think the U.S. is not at that point yet, but once it hits a point like that, if it can, or when it does, then all of a sudden it's going to happen very, very quickly, and then it'll be a big problem, and people will say, "Oh, what's going on?"
No, I think you're very right. And, it's correct, that we all look at this because it's not much different than our own home finances. If we were doing this ourselves, it'd be, spiraling into financial hell. But just to kind of get back on track, my second rhetorical question would be, again, if we're bankrupt, how is it that U.S. Treasury securities are considered the safest investment in the world?
Maybe we're the cream of the crop. I don't know.
But the answer is kind of interesting. We all have this feeling in our gut that the U.S. isn't really bankrupt, that the U.S. is actually so strong and so powerful and that it actually has more assets than even its liabilities. And one of the proofs of that is that, every week we have an auction of treasury bills. And every week, more people effectively lend money to the United States, which they, of course, wouldn't do if we were really bankrupt. But let me jump to the solution here. For most of the history of the United States, we were on the gold standard. And it was fascinating because the idea was that we had all this gold in Fort Knox. And because we had that, we printed money. We printed paper money that reflected the value of that gold in Fort Knox. So we could say, here's $10 because we have $10 of gold behind it. And for a period, to prove the point, that for a period, Americans were actually even able to trade in a dollar bill, for actual gold. And then what happened is that the gold standard ended during the Nixon administration. And I believe that was kind of the beginning of the end for Congress to say, oh, we don't really have to, have actual money in back of the currency. And, they just started spending money. But jumping back to this feeling in our guts about the assets that the United States really has. Well, it does. If you look at actual accounting standards, real accounting standards, and we were treating this like a business, well, we wouldn't say the only asset of the United States is gold. We would say, come on, the United States has vast public lands and oil reserves and mineral reserves and buildings, military installations, planes and ships and schools and hospitals and on and on and on, to where we actually have assets that far eclipse the value of our gold. So that's where I came up with, instead of the gold standard, the asset standard. And it simply says the U.S. has all of the assets it needs to cover paying off its debt, and that we can literally send checks to the people we owe money to. And, let me give you an example. We'll send a check to China for $1 trillion. We owe them $1 trillion, that they have in U.S. treasuries. And, we say, thank you very much. Cash your check. We're paying off our loan. And the question is, Rich, will it clear? Will they deposit it, and will it clear? And my contention is that everybody, like including your Aunt Betty, is going to run to their bank and deposit that check. And then will it clear? And it will clear because it's written on the United States Bank. It's written on the Federal Reserve Bank. So here we have the same solution to pay off the debt that we've always used for the argument to print money, of value of the assets of the United States in terms of adding more currency into the system.
Who's an asset, the value comes from the ownership of it. So unless you give up ownership, you'd have to, I guess, make this money appear out of thin air, which is how they do treasury bills, by the way. But how would that work?
They simply write a check. They say, okay, well, we've got, instead of $100 trillion of gold, let's say we've got $500 trillion of assets of the United States. And we're going to, send checks against that value. We have the assets. If you had the assets in your house or your business, you could use those assets to pay off whatever debt you had. And that's exactly what we're doing here. And it's not aggressive. It's normal, regular accounting that you can justify.
If you sell, nations have sold assets before, but that usually means the ownership transfers to a foreign entity, So, I guess there'll be select assets that you could do that with, but when you
says you're simply issuing money against those assets because you have the value. So like when you printed bills against gold, you didn't give people the gold, you gave people the paper.
But they could still claim the gold, So if I refinance my house, the bank gives money, but they have a claim against my house. They have a mortgage. And if I don't subsequently make payments, they'll foreclose on it and take the asset. So why would China want, X number of buildings, let's say?
No, they don't. China gets a check and cashes the check, and the check clears. And that money is in China's account from the United States. It's money, not, in that sense, it's money, not giving assets. The difference in your own personal finances versus the government is the government can actually print money, which you can't do.
Right. But that would inflate the money supply, even though let's say it all goes to China, there's still now more money running around. So that would create even more inflationary pressure and price action upwards.
Well, that's normally quite true. That when you have increased government spending, you are increasing the money supply. That's absolutely sure. And it does increase inflation as well. But here, we've already borrowed the money. So don't forget, this is money that the U.S. borrowed, and we're paying it back. So this is money China, and again, your Aunt Betty, loaned to the United States. And what we're doing is paying it back. We're not creating new money. Well, I guess we kind of are creating new money, but it's money that we've already spent in debt. And now here's the way: get out of the debt and actually do it in a way that secures the country. And the one negative I really see about this is if you give this ability to Congress, they'll never stop spending. It'll just be a free-for-all. So I believe that it would have to come with literally a constitutional amendment that would say that the government has to have a balanced budget. It can't spend more than it's taking in on taxes. So we never get in this problem again. And by the way, doing this once, I would even go extra. I would fund the things that are unfunded right now. Like, we have Social Security and Medicare that are underfunded and things like that. And give public schools a big shot in the arm to make things better and more equal. And, spend money that we really need to spend right now to take this country into the future. But use it once. And after you use it once, you have to shut that magic lamp down.
I have one idea for you. Let's see what you think, if you don't mind. You'd indulge me. I would like a law that says a bill in Congress can be no more than 4 sides of a piece of paper, 10-point font. Who cares about, I don't know, quarter-inch margin on all sides. It can only contain, in that space. So I think then bills would all be readable, and you couldn't have all these, pork items put in there and hidden in there, and they wouldn't be thousands and thousands of pages. So just that alone, I think, would make for better governance. What's your thoughts?
I love that. Absolutely love it and totally agree. When you have any given law that's thousands of pages, it's meaningless. Nobody can read it. Nobody can understand it. What's the point? So I completely agree. I think that's, goes along with the name of your podcast. You found genius in yourself.
Well, thank you. No, this is what I was going to ask you is, what do you see as the commonality, either the unwillingness or the inability to solve all of these problems? Like, have you sat and thought about that? Like, what do all these things have in common? I guess I would say like human frailty, meaning greed and other issues. But what would you say?
Well, I think these are really big problems, and the solutions require a tremendous amount of work and effort and a dedication to the concept. One of the things that I did with my book, and I think it's what I'm really happy with, is I have this kind of central theme of we need to all get involved. Congress and our representatives work for us. It's not the other way around. They work for us. And if you can read this book and come away with, a few or even one idea that you're passionate about, make the public schools better than private schools. Whatever finds your passion and you say, yeah, Mitch, that idea works for me. That makes sense. Get involved. And I think all of us really need to get involved in getting solutions enacted by the people that represent us. And there's kind of this overriding theme. I'm very big into quotes, and there's a quote from Mahatma Gandhi that said, "When the people lead, the leaders will follow." And that's what I'm after with this. I'm after stimulating people to be interested and get involved to some degree. And it can be as simple as, tell your family about an idea. Tell your family what you believe in. And here's this idea for making public schools better than private schools. And we need to do this. And tell other people and write to your representatives. You can keep getting more involved and more involved, but you don't have to be completely involved. You don't have to quit your job, but you can, just simply tell other people. Let's get a groundswell of Americans who want these things fixed and make sure that our representatives fix them.
Well, what kind of feedback do you get when you propose these solutions to people, or, people that have read your book? Like, what are some of the interesting things that you've gotten in reply?
I've had some really fascinating response. I'd say overall, it's really positive because the problems there are 20 problems that I go through in the book, and they're big. They're big ass problems, and they're problems that are so big that honestly they're just not being addressed. And most everybody that I talk to or that reads the book, has responded to me like, "Holy crap, this is doable." This isn't just some idea that's pie in the sky. These things are actually doable. So that's the response. Jack Canfield, who wrote the Chicken Soup for the Soul book, which is actually the most successful, biggest selling nonfiction book in history, read pre-publication book for me of Badass. And he was so complimentary. He actually called me and he wrote the foreword because he liked the book so much. And then like from that foreword, he said, if any of the solutions offered in the book catch on, it could spark real change that could benefit millions. And that's just really made my year. It was incredible, but it's cool. But I've had that kind of response from a lot of people who are getting excited to see something that could make real change.
Okay. Well, I mean, what is there any particular issue in the book that you personally are the most passionate about, and are you going to take it up in essentially in, like, I don't want to say crusade, but is there any particular issue that you most want to solve?
Well, beside all of them, yeah. The one that I talked about earlier at first was, the rising ocean level. I see that as really cataclysmic, that if we don't start doing something, I see just, tens, if not hundreds of millions of people being displaced, and the value of the assets of real estate, of land, of agriculture along all coasts and all islands in the world are going to be decimated. And if we don't do something right now, and I really mean it, right now, it's unavoidable. So I think that's the one thing that is probably the biggest problem that I think we can really cure before it's too late.
I guess all the problems really could cause us. Well, I'll ask you instead. How many different problems have you identified in the book, and how many of them would have to come to fruition, in their horrible way, for things to be so bad that it would affect all the other ability? It would affect the ability to solve any of the other ones.
I'm not sure that that's the case. I think that each issue can really stand on its own, and not be necessary to the repair of the other problems. But we talk, there's education, there's the economy. We just went in with, there's stopping mass killings, and the assault rifles that killed my brother-in-law's brother. I really addressed China and Russia and what we need to do about that. Robocalls and identity theft and all that. The Federal Reserve, I think, is a mess. We have to restructure that. I've got a great solution for the abortion problem, if you can imagine. Healthcare and crime, restructure U.S. taxes completely, solve the drug problem and the gang problem, redo our elections, how we should fight military and wars anymore, actually redo the entire stock market, which I think is, devolved into a total casino. It's just a joke with our money.
Well, again, do you see an underpinning or a commonality in all these problems? Or you think they're all different? There's different causations of them.
Oh, they're definitely different. I think if I can pin any commonality, it's that they are not being addressed. Solutions are not coming forth and being worked on.
And why do you think that is?
I don't, not sure. I think that people tend to say, it's just too big. That really can't get fixed. How are you really going to solve the U.S. deficit? How can we pay it off? You and I first started talking about, solving the deficit, and realized that, we couldn't tax our way out of it. We couldn't cut expenses out of it. We got to do something radical, which I came up with. But most people end at, well, it can't be done. We can't solve the 50-year civil war that we've had over abortion. It's just too big, and nobody's going to come off their stance and forget that one and walk away. And I think that's really what's been going on with all 20 of the problems I identified and came up with solutions for. So that's the commonality, Rich, is that they're so big that people just think they can't get solved.
Okay. Yeah. I was just wondering, because you would have that perspective after, thinking about all these things and writing the book. I'm sure you would sit back and be like, oh man, what do you tackle first? And then again, why are all these things the way they are? So that's why I asked you.
Yeah, but what's cool is it actually left me optimistic. It actually left me feeling good. And I think when you read the book, first of all, it's kind of funny, and it's not like reading a textbook. But we have all these problems, and the message is, yes, we have all these massive problems, but guess what? They're all fixable. We can solve all this. This is good news. It's not bad news. Got really good news for everybody.
Well, that's good. Usually people that talk about things like this, they just get totally deflated. And they're in despair, and it takes over from what I can hear. And it just leads to, I guess, like I said, people giving up and figuring there's nothing I can do. It's too big, he's unsolvable.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. And I'm hopeful that people read Badass Solutions and come away as optimistic as I am and say, God, yeah, we really can move away from these problems and move into, a wonderful future for our country and our planet, our people, our poor people. Let's fix all this stuff.
Yeah, it sounds like something that you would go around and give lectures about each problem and, either live or online or something like that. But yeah, it just seems like really to get the word out, that's what it would take for something like this, to speak to affected groups that have like a big interest in, in solving one of these particular problems and trying to galvanize them to do something.
Yeah, I think that's part of it for sure.
Okay, well, where do we go from here? Like, what's your, now over the next coming, few years, what's your plan to either move this forward, or what else are you working on?
Well, I actually have, I'm assembling, additional problems, that, for another book. But the reality is if this book doesn't, reach a critical mass, then it's kind of just a waste of time. My effort right now really is to try to get this book in people's hands. So I'm doing a lot of podcasts, getting the book to groups and to, powerful people who could get excited by this, like Jack Campbell, who wrote Chicken Soup for the Soul, and a lot of other people like that getting involved. But I'm trying real hard to use this book as the tool for change. Because it's there, it's in the book. You can get excited for, making change. So I'm trying to use this and get the word out.
All right. So where can listeners get the book so they can read it?
Thanks for that. Yeah, it's available, wherever books are sold. The easiest is on Amazon. It's Badass Solutions, with or without a hyphen, Badass Solutions. They can look up Mitch Francis and find it. It's pretty easy to find. We've actually already been #1 Amazon bestseller in its category. It's kind of a fleeting thing because there's so many books out all the time. It was an Amazon new release bestseller. So it's trying to get it in a lot of hands.
Okay. Well, very good. Well, Mitch, thanks for coming on the podcast, and thanks for actually spending time to think about these things when a lot of people just, like I said, shrug and move on. So, I appreciate both, and it's a good thing that you're trying to do. So I just want to recognize you for that.
Oh, that's very nice, Rich. Thank you very much. And great to be with you. I think you asked really good questions and had some really good input for, the problems that we face in solving problems. You're right.
Thanks.
If you like this podcast, please click the link in the description to subscribe and review us on iTunes.
You've been listening to the Finding Genius podcast with Richard Jacobs. If you like what you hear, be sure to review and subscribe to the Finding Genius podcast on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. And want to be smarter than everybody else? Become a premium member at findinggeniuspodcast.com. This podcast is for information only. No advice of any kind is being given. Any action you take or don't take as a result of listening is your sole responsibility. Consult professionals when advice is needed.